Medieval kings regularly travelled from place to place and castle to castle throughout their kingdom in order to conduct their work, which fell into three main areas: defence of the realm, keeping peace within the realm, finance and affairs of state. The king had to defend his country from attack from other countries as well as other areas within the country. Dundonald's kings fought the Vikings, the English, and clan chiefs from other parts of Scotland. Local barons and lords were obliged to supply the men for the king's army whenever the king demanded. Kings held courts and acted as judges, especially when barons and lords were involved. The local barons were often fighting each other, and one of the king's jobs was to keep the peace between them. Kings taxed people to fund their wars and lifestyle, and these taxes had to be collected regularly. Kings took many people with them on their travels, such as chaplains, cooks, ambassadors, minstrels, and servants. Sometimes kings even took their windows with them because glass was so expensive in those days.
So now I've moved to a part of the courtyard that we believe held the stables for the castle. And I'm going to tell you about a chap called the Marshal. Now the Marshal is a guy in charge of transportation. Kings and queens are often on the move, and it's his job to make sure everything is ready for them when they go. So he's in charge of the stable lads, the blacksmiths, the farriers. So think of him as the king's travel agent.
Religion was very important in the 14th century, and most castles had their own chapel and employed priests, called chaplains, to take services. The chaplain led prayers every morning for the castle family to attend. They baptised babies, conducted marriage services, and took funerals. They also listened to people confess what they had done wrong and gave them prayers to say as a penance. Particularly when the men of the castle went to war, they knew that they would be guilty of killing people, so the chaplain was asked to pray for forgiveness for this killing on behalf of the men and the soldiers. The chaplain in a large castle was also called a chancellor, and as well as taking services, he had other duties such as writing personal and business letters for the king, and he was therefore trusted to use the king's seal. The chaplain also employed the almoner, who gave out daily help to the poor, such as food left over from meals or old clothing. All chaplains had to be educated before they could be ordained as priests, and because they were educated, they were responsible for teaching all the children living in the castle. Only men were allowed to be priests or chaplains. It wasn't until 1994 that the church finally allowed women to be ordained as well.
In an era where disease and illness is everywhere and battle wounds were a daily occurrence, it was important for a castle to have an apothecary. An apothecary was like a modern day pharmacist, and the practice is believed to be a precursor for chemistry and science. People within the show were often female and create potions and mixtures, mainly for medicinal purposes, but many people believed that these could be used as poison and love potions. An apothecary would get the ingredients from the castle's gardens and grounds, such as plants and herbs, but they would also use ingredients such as animal bile and urine from animals and even humans. While an apothecary was a popular figure within the castle community, many of them met a grisly end as their practice was deemed witchcraft and they were burned at the stake.
Another job at the castle would be that of the entertainers. They would travel between different castles to come along and play music or perform plays or do stories telling or poetry in order to entertain the royal family. The other person would have been a court jester or a fool, and they were historically the entertainers of the medieval and the Renaissance era households. They were a member of the household that were employed to entertain guests. Jesters were also itinerant performers who entertained common folk at fairs and town markets. But in the case of Dundonald Castle, it's likely that the jester would have stayed in the castle. He would have worn brightly coloured clothes and eccentric hats, often with bells on the hat, at the end of the hat, a tricorn hat, possibly, and also on the shoes. They entertained with a very wide variety of skills. Principally amongst them was singing, storytelling, and doing acrobatics, juggling, telling jokes, and also doing imitations of people and magic tricks. Much of the entertainment was performed in a comic style, and many jesters made contemporary jokes in word or song about the people or events well known to their audiences. The tables of the wealthy were generally open to them for the sake of the amusement they afforded. Mary Queen of Scots had a jester called Nicola. Her son, King James VI of Scotland, employed a jester called Archibald Armstrong. During his lifetime, Armstrong was given great honours in court. He was eventually thrown out of the king's employment when he overreached and insulted too many influential people. Even after this disgrace, books telling of his jests were sold in the London streets, so he must have been quite a funny person. He held some influence in the court in the reign of Charles I and the estates and the lands in Ireland. Jesters were often the only ones who were able to bring the bad news to the king that no one else would dare to deliver. They would also be the one who, acting a fool, would be considered one, and therefore could be party to listening into conversations that might be treasonous to the king. Since a medieval kingdom was a precarious one with many enemies, it was usual for there to be a high level of security. The jester was one of the few people who were permitted to be close to the king, and usually one of his most trusted men, as long as his pranks didn't go too far and he could be thrown in the dungeon.
The art of tailoring dates back to the early Middle Ages, becoming an official occupation by the 11th century. The word tailor comes from the French word tailler, which means to cut. It was a male-dominated profession and taught through an apprenticeship with hands-on practical experience under the supervision of a master tailor. The tools the tailor used were basic and included a knife and shears. Cutting out patterns was the main skill of a tailor, which were created directly onto cloth as paper was too expensive. The most detailed and elaborate clothing was reserved for royalty to show their status. The king and queen of the castle would have hired a tailor to make customized gowns and robes from the most luxurious fabrics, mostly silk and velvet in the brightest of colours, to demonstrate their wealth. The Stuarts may even have been wealthy enough to afford silk undergarments, which were much more comfortable than wool.
In a great medieval castle, the wardrobe was the place where noble lords, ladies, and even the king and queen stole their clothes. They got dressed there. They often stored other valuables there as well. The position of keeper of the wardrobe was an important one. The keeper of the wardrobe was in charge of taking care of all the clothes and all the valuables, and that included making sure that they were cleaned properly, making sure that they were mended, and keeping an entire inventory of everything that was kept in the wardrobe. As such, the keeper of the wardrobe would have been an important position. It would have been one that was fairly well respected, and it would have been one that was in charge of the tailors who mended the clothes and of the laundresses who washed them.
Okay, now right behind me you can see a fairly substantial gate. The man in charge of that gate would have been the porter. He's the guy with the keys to the castle, and it's his job to lock the castle up every night to make it nice and secure, and then open it again in the morning for business. And working with him would be the door wards or the guards, and he would have one of those planted in every doorway to make sure that nobody goes past who shouldn't. And they both work for the constable.
Hello, I'm Marcia, an archaeologist who volunteers at Dundonald Castle. I'll be describing some of the roles you might expect to find in a medieval castle. A fletcher. The word fletch or fletching describes the feathers at the end of an arrow. Fletchers were an essential job in medieval times. Every village would have had someone who specialised in this craft, and certainly every castle. A fletcher would make the flight feathers on the arrow, as well as the bows and the arrows and the crossbows. A bower or fletcher would supply bow and arrows for the hunting animals to keep the castle fed in peace times, and during times of war, the fletcher would have an essential role to play. It was quite a specialised craft, because depending on how far you wanted your arrow to fly, or what sort of target you were hunting, human or animal, it would depend on the type of flight feathers and the pitch and grade of the flight feathers that you used to create your arrow. Arrow craftsmen would learn from other specialised master craftsmen, and so the knowledge and skills would be passed on from generation to generation.